Well, let's talk about this with someone else who absolutely knows what she's talking about. It's Vanessa Frake. She's a former prison governor, including the HMP Wormwood Scrubs. She's also author of The Governor, My Life Inside Britain's Most Notorious Prisons. Good morning to you, Vanessa.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you so much indeed for joining us. Do you echo the concern of the Chief Inspector of Prisons that this is certainly going to be a risky time with this mass release of prisoners all in one day?
Inevitably, you know, our rates of reoffending are so dreadful in this country anyways. And when you think of the numbers involved here, we're releasing 1,700 prisoners today. We usually release around 1,000 a week. So, you know, all in one go, it's a complete strain on the probation service.
And they're already under strain, even with the 1,000 a week.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's something like 2,000 probation officers short, which is incredulous that, you know, again, this strain has been put on them. But, you know, if prisoners are going to reoffend, they're going to reoffend whether you let them out at 40% or 50%. And I think that's what we have to remember. I think, you know, the majority, I am hopeful, will have been put on the right licence with the right conditions. And will hopefully turn their lives around. But,
well, you say that. I mean, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? But the reality is that that's not what the stats say. So in terms of the conditions and the licence, people aren't just let out. You know, we see these you know, these films where someone's just let out of jail. There's literally the door bang shut behind them. You know, we've got cameras outside, you know, prisons today, you know, waiting for people to come out. And then they just go away with a few quid in their pocket and the clothes they wore on when they got put into prison. But it's actually a bit different from that, isn't it? You do have to report to a probation officer, you have to go and find somewhere to live, you've got to go to the benefits office. There's an awful lot for someone to do on their first day out of jail. Where do things tend to go wrong? Because there's a big concern, isn't there, of a lot of these people being homeless, and once they're homeless, that's a downward spiral into crime. Absolutely, and you know, it is recognised that homelessness is a big factor in reoffending. But there are many charities that work within prisons prior to release, and that is part of the resettlement programme, like NACRO, like St Mungo's, and several others. That it shouldn't be charities doing this, should it? That's the thing I find. I mean, they're wonderful charities, I know. Why are charities dealing with this? Well, basically, they're the experts, but you know, there isn't enough staff to do that full time, nor funding. You know, and these charities like Stonewall and the rest of them, they're all part of that process of resettlement. So, you know, there are prisoners that are released homeless. I don't doubt that. But there are a lot that find somewhere to live, whether that be council places or hostels or whatever, prior to release, because that is part of the resettlement process. But much harder to do when there's 1,700 of you coming out, and they're not all coming out, you know, in the same prison on the same day. But there's going to be a lot more pressure to find that housing, isn't there? And in terms of their licences, a lot of concern about who these people are. Now, we know the government have been very, very clear that from October, certainly, violent offenders are going to be freed. More than 5,000 in total, including violent offenders, are going to be freed over the next 6 weeks. So a lot of that in October. But we were told originally that violent offenders weren't going to be released this time round, but that's not true. They were called lower-level violent criminals. So if you've got a sentence for 2 years for GBH with intent, you may well come under this. If you've got more than 4 years, then you're not eligible. But I mean, someone's serving a prison sentence for 2 years for grievous bodily harm with intent. I'm pretty scared of that person coming out of prison. I've got to be honest with you. But that person is going to come out of prison at 50% either. So that's also wrong. It should be 100%. But you know. Well, yeah, that's a different channel, isn't it? You know, that's a law. But you know, we at 2 years they do 12 months on the old 50%. On the 40%, they'll probably do 10.5 months. So you're talking about 6 weeks. Or so less. So wait a minute, in that case, what's the big deal? They're going to come out anyway in a few weeks' time. You know, why is everyone getting their knickers in a twist? No, not at all. You know, I understand people's concern, but I think we have to put it in perspective here. Rather than, you know, we're not going to have gangs of released prisoners walking down the streets, but I understand people's
trepidation. And also, I understand the victims of crime. You know, why shouldn't they do what they're supposed to do? Absolutely. But I think, you know, if we don't do anything is worse than if we do it, that if we didn't have the early release scheme. You know, you can't have a prison system that grinds to a halt where you can't arrest anybody, you know, violent offenders, sexual offenders, you know, paedophiles, whatever. You can't have a process where you've got nowhere to put those sorts of people.
And how did we get to this? I mean, in terms of, because, you know, look, there's no doubt at all. I mean, I think it's perfectly fair on this case that the Labour Party can criticise the Conservatives for a failure to build enough prisons. But Labour are constantly saying they've got a prisons minister saying there should be fewer people behind bars. Now, I think that everyone should serve their full sentence. Maximum I'd allow off is 10%. I mean, maximum, and that's for perfect good behaviour. I mean, perfect good behaviour. Otherwise, you serve the full sentence. But you know, that even if we did that, we'd have to basically, you know, build out another 10 prisons, wouldn't we?
Well, yeah, but I mean, your initial statement, we blame the previous government. I don't agree with that. This all started with Blair and Brown and the introduction of the IPP prisoners. Those prisoners that are still 2,000 of them languishing in jail.
Remind us what the IPP prisoners were.
Right, it's an indeterminate prison sentence, which basically meant the 3 strikes and you're out. So you get a minimum sentence of, say, 3 years, but actually you're a life sentence prisoner. So during that 3 years, you were supposed to complete a lot of sort of control CBT courses,
therapy,
therapy and deal with it. But of course, because there were so many of them, that the list for these courses just went on and on and on.
So they couldn't be released?
One prisoner, no. And I know of one prisoner who's done 22 years of a 3-year sentence for stealing a mobile phone. To me, that isn't justice. No. And instead of you know, locking people up for non-payment of council tax or drug offences, and I don't mean dealing drugs, I meant, you know, being found with their own personal supplies instead of helping them deal with that addiction. I think, you know, we lock too many people up in this country for first-time non-violent offences, and those sorts of offences would be far better off being dealt with in the community. And that's really what started it. And then, of course, you've got ministers making fly-on-the-wall statements about how we'll extend sentences for this crime, we'll extend sentences for crime, and not thinking of the consequences.
You'll need extra prison places, because people actually are serving, and again, this goes against all the public narrative, people are serving longer sentences now for a lot of crimes. But one of the issues is, though, isn't it, when we talk about, say, the reoffending rate, is that so many people who go into prison don't go to, I mean, there are some, usually say you think they shouldn't be there on a first offence or a non-violent offence, but so many people who do go to prison for, say, particularly, you know, theft, it's, you know, it's based on their sort of 200th, you know, crime, and perhaps the 40th they've been convicted of, or 2000th crime.
Sometimes.
So actually, well, of course they're going to reoffend. It's not like their first offence. They might be the first time they've gone to prison, but it's not their first, you know, it ain't their first rodeo. They're going to be, they've been doing this as a lifestyle, effectively, for years, in which case you're going to expect reoffending rates to be higher. We don't imprison some people soon enough, I would say.
Yeah, but you see, short, sharp shock treatments in prison do not work. The statistics show that if you jail somebody for 6 months, out of that on the old scheme, they'd have done 3 months. Yeah. In that 3 months, they've sat next to proper hardened criminals and learned how to do it properly. When they're released, they've probably lost their home, they've lost their support systems, they may have lost their job if they had a job. So what have they got left? They've got crime to turn to.
So it just makes things worse. OK, so can I ask you just finally about Richard Tice a little bit earlier, was on the Reform UK Deputy Leader. He said one of the issues we've got is 8,000 foreign prisoners in our jails right now, using our space. We should to send those back to their home countries to be imprisoned there at their expense and filling up their jails, and that would free 8,000 places. What do you think?
I think he's absolutely spot on. The problem is we've got the European Court of Human Rights, and the only people that make money out of foreign national prisoners are lawyers who jump on the bandwagon to keep them here. And, you know, they languish in our jails 2-3 years at a time, just waiting and trying to fight the system. And that is the problem.
And we pay for their legal aid as well. That's the extra joy for everybody.
We do.
Vanessa Frake, great to talk to you. Great to talk to someone who knows this deal. She's former prison governor, including at Wormwood Scrubs. Thank you for that. Also author of The Governor, My Life Inside Britain's Most Notorious Prisons. I mean, she dealt with high-security women's prisons largely as her career, worked for 16 years, dealt with the likes of Roseby West and Myra Hindley. I mean, she can take on this. I put her in charge quite happily.